What is going on, Pacer Nation? Welcome back to another episode here of your go-to Pacers podcast. It is 8:07 on Sunday night, and Facci and I are here to break down all of the craziness happening here on free agency night. There are a ton of moves being made. Luke Kornet going back to the Boston Celtics. Kevin Love returning to the Miami Heat. Oh, and Andre Drummond, he's switching teams. Facci's going to the Philadelphia 76ers. But hey, there was some news that broke earlier this afternoon involving the Indiana Pacers, and they have agreed to re-sign Obi Toppin to a 4-year deal for $60 million. How are you feeling, Fletch?
I'm feeling good. Look, I think that when you look at this Pacers team, they had a very successful season. You don't want to shake up too much. You want to keep the core intact for the most part. See if you can round out those edges. I think Obi Toppin, that situation, once Pascal Siakam re-signed or it plans to re-sign, they came to an agreement. Obi Toppin was that next big domino to fall for the Pacers. And I think it was right in line, average-wise, to where you and I said we feel comfortable at. That 15 million, average on the contract, 4 years, 60 million. To me, didn't feel like an overpay. I do feel that Obi Toppin is still getting better. I think he's a huge part of that bench unit. And I think it's a very smart move for Indiana to lock him up now. The only thing that I thought they might have done is I thought they might have waited for him to get an offer and then match it. Were you surprised to see Indiana get this done immediately instead of waiting to match?
Honestly, no. I think that it's not smart to allow another team to give a player a contract and you kind of match it. This isn't a Roy Hibbert situation with the Portland Trailblazers a couple 10 years ago, right? Whatever that was. But I will say this, Obi Toppin, like you said, was a very important piece off the bench. I think we learned early on. We've talked about this already, that he was not the answer at the starting power forward spot. But the fact that he embraced that role so well off the bench really says a lot to me. But I do like the fact that Obi Toppin played, I think, every single game last year, Facci.
100.
Yeah. And speaking of 100, Caitlin Cooper has been talking about this. Only player, I think, in the Pacers history
Yes.
to have 100 made threes and 100 dunks in one season. So that to me kind of shows you why he fits this team so well. $15 million per year on average. I know that it's kind of layered here, Facci, maybe 13 something in the first year, kind of work its way up to eventually equaling that $60 million based on percentage increases. But I know me and you talked about what we thought Obi Toppin's value would be. And I said, would you really let Obi Toppin walk if he made $15 million a year? And it's a couple, 5, 6 million more than maybe you wanted to pay overall. And it looks like the Pacers were like, you know what? It's worth bringing him back for a little bit more money than maybe they wanted, because you look at a guy like Aaron Nesmith, who signed for a 3-year, $33 million deal. They got a huge bargain on that. And I think to see a starter only making $11 million per year and then seeing a power forward coming off the bench making around $13 to $15 million on average, I mean, that to me says like, ooh, it's kind of interesting. But at the same time, I don't think there's any way they could let Obi Toppin walk.
Now, I think if you let Obi Toppin walk and you lost Jaylen Smith, then you're just really banking on internal growth. Like you're saying, okay, Jarace Walker needs to take a leap. Like he needs to go from being out of the rotation to being someone that they can count on every single night. Might not be ready for that. Definitely want more of an opportunity for Jarace. We'll get into that later on, but I think for Obi Toppin, you got someone that, like I mentioned before, is still getting better. Last year was absolutely a career year. You saw him take a leap forward from three-point land. I think that the best is yet to come. You mentioned it, very comfortable in his role. This is not someone that now you need to promise a starting job to or is going to be, itching to be a starter. I think they probably clearly established, here's what we expect out of you coming off the bench, being, a part of what was the best bench unit in the NBA. I think that this signing makes a lot of sense, and I think the Pacers have chemistry. Obi looked very happy there in Indiana. We know he seems to be good friends with Tyrese Haliburton, seems to be very well liked by his teammates. I think overall the fit has been perfect.
No, it really has. And I like the way that Rick Carlisle utilized him as one of the guys off the bench, as more of like that small ball center at times. We know Miles Turner was hurt in that game 4 against the Celtics, and they decided to go with Obi a little bit more down the stretch because Miles couldn't move as much. And whenever I've asked Rick Carlisle about Obi Toppin, he said he's always liked the bigger, power forward that's able to play a lot of different positions. So we'll see moving forward what happens with Obi Toppin, but I do think that people have to be excited about him coming back just because of what he meant to the team. And I know there was some speculation out there that Indiana could have went after Contavious Caldwell Pope today. That obviously was debunked as he signed with the Orlando Magic, but it just seemed to me like, okay, if they're going to go after this kind of player, how are they going to afford it? And to me, Obi Toppin's deal makes a lot of sense. You mentioned it. You don't think he'll finish out his 4-year deal here with the Pacers. You think he's one of those guys that could be moved. And I do agree with that because of all of the young players they're going to have to eventually pay. And it is interesting because it's on the same timeline here as Pascal Siakam's deal. So kind of interesting to have both guys locked in for that much money moving forward.
It's kind of also in that situation why I'm looking at that 2028 first round pick, and I'm like, you might want to hold on to that because the way some of these contracts align, it's going to be interesting. But I do think, and this is always the rough part of this, but we had to do this with Bruce Brown last year, and it proved to be right. You do need a certain amount of these contracts to be on the books where if you do want to get better and make a trade, who could you trade? You look at this Pacers roster right now. They have 2 max contracts. You have Miles Turner at just about $20 million. And then there's such a drop off next between Aaron Nesmith at $11 million. So the Pacers don't really have those type of contracts that you could facilitate in a deal. Like if you were to say move on from a Bennedict Mathurin right now, if it's a straight up deal, you're not getting much. So that doesn't make a lot of sense at all. I think Obi's money being in at about close to $13.5 million this year and moving up, that contract could come in handy down the line. But short term, I'm very excited about him coming back to the Pacers, being able to build on the career year that he had last year. And I think that right now, you look at the Pacers offseason, so far, yes, there hasn't been any new additions, but I think they've retained every key piece. Jaylen Smith had fallen out of the rotation. We'll get into that a little bit later in this episode. But for right now, hey, you re-signed Pascal Siakam, you re-signed Obi Toppin. We're coming off of Eastern Conference Finals appearance. Life's good being an Indiana Pacers fan right now.
Yeah, I think the Pacers like the success they had with Obi Toppin in the playoffs. Obviously, got all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and why some people might not think that it was really a true statement of what this team actually is moving forward. This team clearly believes in themselves, and as you guys will hear tomorrow in our interview with Aaron Nesmith, he is very confident about this group and what they can do if they run it back. And he advocated multiple times on the podcast to keep it together and let them, they have unfinished business. So sometimes it's not as sexy, it's not as fun to talk about when you don't have new players coming in, but we've seen a lot of change for this Pacers team the last 3 years. It's kind of nice to have familiar faces in the building, a team that has a lot of chemistry together. Yeah, making trades is always interesting, but at the same time, when you can bring back a core that played so well together and just continue to get better and better as the season went on, that's really interesting. Now, I think one reason why this deal does scare fans a little bit, not only is it the length of the deal, but I think it's the where does that leave Jarace Walker, and where does that put Jarace Walker at in the pecking order of Indiana? So, in Indiana's rotation. So, I will just say this, Facci, before we jump into everything, Jarace Walker has to earn this. Just because Jarace Walker wasn't the 8th overall pick in the draft, doesn't just because he was the 8th overall pick does not mean he has guaranteed playing time. Now, you want to see it happen, but he's got to earn it. And if there's guys like Ben Shepherd, Andrew Nembhard, Ben Mathurin, Obi Toppin playing better than him and earning those minutes on the court, then that's just tough luck for the kid. And I wish nothing but the best for Jarace Walker. I think Jarace Walker has potential to be a massive difference maker for this team. And I think by the end of Pascal Siakam's contract, Jarace Walker will be the starting small forward for the Indiana Pacers. That's my hot take. But I just will say this, it's going to be up to Jarace Walker to win these minutes away from a guy like a Ben Shepherd at the small forward spot or from an Obi Toppin who they brought back. If he's playing better than Obi Toppin and he gets minutes, okay, that's because he earned it. So it's not a Rick Carlisle problem like everybody wants to blame Rick for. To me, it's a Jarace Walker has to earn these minutes, and he'll earn those by improving in practice and when he's given opportunity. So that's the first thing I want to say there about Jarace, but I want to allow you to talk about what you think this means for Jarace's future.
I mean, of course, right after the signing happened, I went, okay, brought back Obi. And then I immediately thought, all right, now we have to temper the expectations for Jarace Walker. You definitely do. If Obi Toppin was not brought back, you look at Jarace Walker primarily being maybe the backup 4, and that gives him a big opportunity. I don't want to say sink or swim, but yeah, to your point, you got to earn it. And I think that right now he's going to have to play out of position. I don't think now we can rely on him just being, oh, he's back up four. If that's the case, then he'd be the third, power forward. I think it's going to have to be playing some minutes at the three. It's going to have to be, you play some minutes at the four. Maybe at times, I don't know if he's ready to do anything at the five. Probably not. I think you could slide Siakam down at times to the five. Maybe that opens up some things, but I do think he's going to have to get more playing time at the three, and that's where the Pacers have that opportunity for him. They don't have, a Paul George over there or anything of that sort at the three that's going to be playing 35 minutes a night. That's where he's going to have to earn those minutes. But yeah, nothing's going to be handed to him. And I think that right now this Pacers team is good enough that they can win without Jarace Walker. But if we want to take the next step, it would be great if Jarace Walker could be taking those steps with us, bringing something to the table on a nightly basis. And it might not be every night, but the fact that Obi Toppin did play in 100 games last year, did not miss a game, that says a lot, but it's also something that you might not be able to count on. Injuries could happen, and at any point, I think this year, Jarus needs to be ready on a nightly basis to step in, because I do think more minutes will be available this year, but it's probably not going to be the type of role that many people hope for this year.
Couple of things here I want to touch on. Number one, we've had Chad Buchanan on this podcast. The last couple of times he's mentioned that they liked what they saw from Jarus at the three spot, which he got to play a little bit more, especially when they brought in Siakam. There were some injuries to Nesmith and Mathurin, so they were kind of shorthanded. He had to play more three, and he looked pretty good in those moments. It was a small sample size, but they like what they saw. We also had Chad Buchanan on just a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how Aaron Nesmith was a little bit too small for some of those bigger wings and how they've kind of challenged Jarus to kind of be that guy. Rick Carlisle said earlier this year, I felt like when we started playing with more size, this allowed us to be a better basketball team, specifically defensively. This isn't oh my God, Jarus is out of the rotation now. It's hey, Jarus might be your backup three now, moving forward, next to Obi Toppin and Isaiah Jackson. That's a lot of freaking size out there, Facci, and a huge wingspan from Jarace Walker, who has a 7'2" wingspan. If Jarace Walker can really develop, he's got better skill sets than Ben Sheppard. Ben Sheppard is good at what he does, but there is just a whole nother bag of tricks out there in Jarace Walker's game. It's just not as developed. Ben Sheppard's got 4 years on him in terms of age and experience in college, so it's just going to take some time. But I will say this: I believe in Ben Sheppard a lot, but I think we all know the ceiling is so much higher for Jarace Walker. Last year, I will say this: we saw the Pacers kind of force things a little bit by starting Bennedict Mathurin with Bruce Brown, Obi Toppin, Miles Turner, and Tyrese Haliburton at the beginning of the season. It lasted what, maybe 15 games before Rick Carlisle threw the towel in and he put Ben Mathurin on the bench and started Buddy Hield. Okay, so people didn't like that idea at first, but the team was clearly better with Buddy Hield out there based off what he does. I think if Indiana is out there trying to force anything with saying, okay, Jarus has to get these minutes, somebody else has to come out of the rotation, and they try to force it, it wouldn't be shocking to me because we've seen that happen already. And I think the front office and the agent might be pushing for that. And so it might be, hey, Ben Sheppard, you're going to get the Andrew Nembhard treatment. You might not play a whole lot. We're going to change your role up a little bit. But look how Andrew Nembhard kind of earned that spot back after being demoted. He was, the backup point guard for a while, and then he kind of struggled at times, and McConnell took that, and now he wasn't playing nearly as much. I think there was one game he played like 9 minutes because he was having turnover problems and things like that. So I just think they've got a lot of cards in their deck that they got to shuffle through and figure out which ones are the right ones to play. But I would fully expect Jarace Walker to get a significant look at the back of small forward spot moving forward. And to me, I'm kind of predicting this moving forward, but I think Ben Sheppard might be the odd man out.
Here's the thing. I don't know Jarace Walker personally, but I would like to imagine that last year has lit a fire under him, because nothing was handed to him. He probably expected, rightfully so, that he would be playing more. But from everything we've heard so far in the offseason, he's been working out. He's been looking great. He's been putting in that work. And I do think that we're going to get a totally different guy next year that just comes back saying, I need to scratch claw and earn everything I got. For Ben Sheppard, I think, I don't say I picked 26. You don't have these monumental expectations. I think he exceeded a lot of them, But like long term, you typically think that talent will win out. We'll see what happens. This feels like talent versus kind of hard work, and I'm sure Ben Shepherd, far more seasoned, like we touched on. But Jarace Walker, you would like to think eventually he'll rise to the top, and it might take another year. It very well might. Maybe next year is a good step forward, and then after that, playing time opens up even more. See, he's still very young. He's 20 years old right now,
Mhm.
so we have time. But I do think that yes, he's absolutely staring at a backup role, not a guaranteed role on a nightly basis. But he's not ready to be the starting four on this team, or a primary four. Could you say that? Yeah, good, but that's not the situation right now. Pacers have a good problem on their hands. Eventually, down the line, everybody knows. Everyone who's watched this team, 10 out of 10 people will say at some point a trade has to happen to consolidate this roster. That moment is not yet, but it is in the near future.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, everybody knows that eventually someone's going to be traded. Who is that player? Who is that person? Time will tell. It'll be a lot determined on who does well in these moments and who continues to grow as a player. Are there players that they have on rookie contracts that look for bigger opportunities elsewhere? Which we'll talk about that later in the month of July, depending on what happens to Andrew Nembhard, because I think that's a very fascinating conversation that we need to dive into if he does not agree to an extension in the offseason. It makes me very worried about his future with Indiana. If that's the case, which would make sense if that's why they want to bring back TJ McConnell on a long-term extension, and then they went out there and drafted Tristan Newton, who has also drawn similar comparisons to Andrew Nembhard. Not saying he's the same player, but I do think that it's very interesting. Now, let's talk a little bit here, Facci, about the salary cap, because I think that this does change things a little bit, and we'll get into it here after. We'll get into how everything plays out moving forward. But right now, according to Bobby Marks, who does a great job covering the league and the front office, I mean, he was a former general manager of a team, so he knows how all this works. Indiana's projected salary is at $167 million, which puts them over the salary cap, which is around 140, 141, which the league just announced today. So that does put them over, Facci, the salary cap, but it does not put them over the tax, which gives them a little bit more room to maneuver here. But with that being said, people have been asking on social media, I'm sure you've seen it, how this all works and all this plays out, and how teams are able to make trades like the New York Knicks. So basically, to explain it, you can sign any player back on your team that you have their bird rights to. So the New York Knicks basically being able to bring back OG Anunoby on that 5 year, or is it 5 years, $242 million,
5 year
something
deal.
like that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, 5 years.
it's around 42, $43 million per year. It's like, how are they able to do that? Plus get Mikal Bridges. Well, you got to remember last year they traded Evan Fournier's contract at the trade deadline for Bojan Bogdanovic. Bojan Bogdanovic, trading him to Brooklyn. Plus, they're gonna have to get rid of salary somewhere else in the deal. It's still not finalized what's all being sent out, but they have to basically match salary for Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges, I think he was making around 23, 24, something like that. Was it that much, Fudge?
Yeah, it's right in that range. It's right
Yeah.
around 23.
So because they have the players on their roster to do that, they can make that trade even though they're already over the salary cap, and they could be. I think they are a first apron team according to this graphic that was made today by Hoops Hype. So they are one of three teams in the first apron. Their payroll is expected to exceed $178.7 million. So they do have restrictions, and they cannot take in more salaries in a trade than sending out. They're limited to $5.2 million taxpayer mid level, where if you're a non-taxpayer mid-level, you can get up to about that 12.8 million, which we've talked about. They can't sign buyout players whose salary was at least 12.9 million, and they can't use the trade exceptions generated from the previous season. So all those get washed. They cannot use them. There are limitations to what they can do as a first apron team, and they get more penalized as they become a second apron team, but they won't have to worry about that until they resign more players. So I will just say this to kind of make it simple for you: the Pacers can't go out and sign anybody because they don't have any salary cap space. They can use their exception that they have, but now it gets more tricky, Facci, because of how close they are to that tax and that first apron. So it's going to put a lot of penalties on them if they were to do that. So I would say this for those curious about the salary cap: if you have any other questions and don't understand what I just said, hit me up on Twitter and I will gladly explain it there. Facci, do you have Does it make sense to what I'm saying though, for people that are
No,
listening?
it does. It does. Here's the thing. It's like the Pacers could use that, non-taxpayer mid-level exception at about $12.9 million. But yeah, they're going to be a first apron team. And I think that that's something that historically the Pacers have not been a team to be paying the luxury tax. And I know
Mhm.
Chad Buchanan said, if they have the right roster in place, the ownership might not be opposed to it. But it's the right piece out there to be able to do that. If the Pacers are just running it back with primarily this team, yeah, they're not going to want to have this be a luxury tax team, first apron team. So I think right now Indiana is pretty limited. I don't see them making like a splash. I don't see them making like a big trade at this point. There's not many contracts to kind of offload right now. So this is kind of it. I feel like TJ McConnell was kind of that contract that if the Pacers had non-guaranteed, they would have had a lot more space to be working with. But obviously, McConnell had a major impact with the Pacers. Bringing him back was a priority. I think that was the right move because I think everybody imagines the grass is always greener, but that's not always the case. So for the Pacers, they have a little bit of wiggle room right now. They're about $4 million below that first apron at the moment if they do want to sign someone. So it's not like they can't, but they are definitely a little bit limited.
Yeah, and I've heard people say, well, can't they just, get rid of the cap holds on Obi Toppin, Doug McDermott, and create all this space? That's not how it works. The thing is, when you have cap holds on there, if you depending on what website you look at, if you're looking at ESPN's graphic, they're not even including the cap holds on what's going against the projected salary. They're going off of what the new deals are. But even before that, Bobby Marks was not including those projected cap holds, which I think McDermott's was like 20.9, Toppins was like 20.6, Siakam's was around, I think, what he's making now. So it was a lot of money that were tied over into cap holds. Now, I was trying to get Chad Buchanan to explain this when he was on our podcast earlier this summer, but he really didn't want to get into all the details because it's very confusing. Basically, it's a percentage increase from what they made the previous year. I think it's like 190% more or something like that, depending on what level of free agent you are. If you're a free agent that's coming in off of restricted free agency, things like that, it just it's very confusing, very
It is
detailed.
very confusing.
Basically, what a cap hold is it's it counts against your salary, quote unquote, until you either renounce those rights and allow that player to become an unrestricted free agent, or you re-sign them to a new deal. So yes, Obi Toppin's new deal, Facci, I think we looked it up on Spot Track. It's projected to be about $13.8 million for year one.
Mhm.
So his cap hold was $20 million against the salary. Well, instead of that, now it's 13.8. So you can just wash away that cap hold, which is about 20.4, 20 point, whatever it was. And that does not count against salary. If they want to basically make Doug McDermott a unrestricted free agent, boom, they renounce those cap holds. And that's where whoa, we got some breaking news here, Faji.
Yep. So, and just in, the Los Angeles Clippers have announced that Paul George has decided to sign with another team. The Philadelphia 76ers are expected as the leading suitor. That's from Shams. It's interesting that they would announce that he's decided to sign with another team. It's like, what? Like, let the man announce it, or anyone else. But it definitely feels that Paul George's time while we are recording this
Yes.
has ended with the Clippers. I believe that once Paul George makes his decision, I think a lot of other players will probably look to sign, like a Klay Thompson will find a home, and other players like that.
Yeah, Eric Gordon is agreed to a deal with the 76ers, as well as Andre Drummond. So they're definitely trying to build a team that is built to compete, and I think they will.
I think
We'll
we'll
talk
do.
about that a little bit more, Fachi, here later in this podcast. But last thing, I just want to make sure people know that I saw some reports out there. I know 8.9 seconds wrote an article saying the Pacers, if they renounced Obi Toppin's, basically if they renounced his cap hold and they didn't guarantee McConnell's contract, they would have had $40 million in cap space. That was just incorrect. And I was not trying to be mean when I was calling them out on Twitter. I just wanted to make sure people weren't confused, because the cap is very confusing if you're not someone
This
that's daily looking at it. And I understand it, even with Jaylen Smith opting out, and that was about $5.4 million he left on the table. Think about had he opted in. Now this is a team that's over the tax.
Yeah.
So that could have played a factor into how much they were able to give Obi Toppin. So with him declining that, they maybe were able to give him in a couple extra $1 million. on that deal per year. So I think that everything kind of plays a factor because Indiana does not want to be a tax-paying team. If they do get close to it, they can make some cuts. Obviously, Kendall Brown's on a non-guaranteed contract, but they do not want to cross that tax threshold because they don't want to pay the tax based on what they have shown in previous years. Now, they might do it as long as they can avoid the first apron, but we've not really seen the Pacers be one of those teams. But they have two guys on max contracts, and everybody else, I think Obi Toppin's probably the third high, or Miles Turner's the third highest paid player now at around $20
Now,
million, and then Obi Toppin at 15, then Nesmith at 11. So it's not like Indiana has a lot of bad contracts. It's just they don't have much that they can really maneuver with here outside of trading their max guys, where you look at New York, they were able to get bargain deals with Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, who did not sign max contracts. Then they go out and acquire OG Anunoby with salaries they had there so they could get his bird rights to get Fournier swapped out for Bogdanovich, and they got Alec Burks in that deal. So they just made some really smart moves, and they also acquired a lot of picks along the way to be able to make a deal like they did with New York for Mikal Bridges. So anyway, Facci, I think I've talked about that enough. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, look, I think it's tricky. I think the Pacers contracts are structured very nicely right now, but Indiana had that weird moment where it was like the last 2 years they really didn't have a lot of salary on the books, and I think that was a rare opportunity for them to kind of make some noise. They were nowhere near ready to win an NBA championship or anything, but I think in that span they were able to get some really good looks at some players. Like, think about this: last year they traded for Obi Toppin. Low risk, couple second round picks. It works out. He cashes in. The way that he's able to cash in on this deal is by putting together a really good year. He had a really good year, a career year for himself. Pascal Siakam, they had the assets to be able to go out after him. They get him in a trade. They re-sign him. Like, that was the Pacers' big offseason. It just came a little bit earlier by trading for these players and then being able to re-sign them. But what also blows my mind is, like last year and the year before that, it was like the Pacers had to spend a lot of money to be able to get to like 90% of
You have to
the
get there
salary
too.
cap. That's what they had to do for Bruce Brown. And it was just like people didn't understand. They couldn't wrap their minds around why did they throw that much money at Bruce Brown? They had to. And then before that, the Pacers had like $15 million or more going into the year below, the salary cap. And that's when they rewarded Miles Turner on that contract. So this is what happens when your team gets better, guys make more money, and eventually you have a little bit less wiggle room to play with. The salary cap, actually, I thought it was weird that it came in today. Woj, Shams both tweeted out, actually came in a little bit less than what teams anticipated. It was close to about $1 million less. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're a team like the Pacers that are trying to avoid that first apron, it's like it was close to anywhere between like $500,000 to $800,000, less than what you expected. So it just makes things just a little bit tighter. And I know you talked about, hey, it could be like a Kendall Brown or someone else if you want to, make a tough decision and cut him and promote one of your cheaper rookies or anything of that sort. Indiana could find some ways to work around it. But if you're thinking that we're going to go out there and do like what they mentioned before about KCP, to me, that just didn't make a lot of sense because now you're trading players on your roster. You're going to be a first apron team. So I think right now we have to be happy with what we have, but know that we will replace players like, Doug McDermott, maybe a James Johnson. Could he be brought back? Maybe. But could you also replace him with someone that probably could step on the court? Yes, I think you could, but I don't think they're going to be breaking the bank for anybody.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, any team that is over the salary cap, that's over the first apron, or they're in the first apron or in the second apron, they are always eligible to sign players at the veteran minimum. That's about the only thing that those apron teams can do outside of some of the exceptions they're allowed to use. I don't think, maybe I'm mistaken. Let me check real quick, and I'll move on from this quickly. But I do not believe that teams that are in that second apron can really use more than just the biannual mid-level exception, which I think is around 4.5 million, but they might not even be able to use that. That's one thing I'm not 100% sure on, but they can't send out cash in trades. They can't do sign and trades for free agents in exchange for players, because I had thrown out the idea if the Pacers really want a KCP, it's probably going to have to be a sign and trade deal, but they can't do that because Denver is a second apron team, and no spending exceptions besides bird rights and minimum signing. So they could not use that non-taxpayer, like I just mentioned. It would only be teams like that are in the first apron or right before the first apron. So anyway, moving on, Facci, we got to get to this news. Michael Scotto broke it about Thursday, maybe Friday. I can't remember what day he broke it, but he broke it, and there was some speculation on whether that was actually true or not. But proved to be true. Jaylen Smith opt out of his final year, becomes an unrestricted free agent. What were your thoughts on that?
Two things. One, shout out to Scotto. That man is breaking news. I think that he's already broken up quite a few
He
things. I
broke
think
the
he broke
Drummond
Andre
news.
Drummond. He broke the Andre Drummond news, broke the Jaylen Smith news. That was awesome. As it relates to Jaylen Smith, great guy. Great guy. Thrilled that he had re-signed with the Pacers when we couldn't give him that much money and other teams could give him more. And he did get his stock up this year. He did. He did have a bounce back season. But I knew, looking at the books and how tight things were, kind of hoped that he would opt out and hit unrestricted free agency. And I'm glad that he did, because we mentioned it earlier in the episode. If he opts in and he's at just over $5 million, about $5.4 million, Pacers are a first apron team. At that point, things are really, really tight. I think Jaylen Smith's going to be able to cash in elsewhere, where he could potentially, in the right system, be a starter, if not the primary backup every single night with a defined role. I don't think he was going to have that opportunity in Indiana. I'm happy that he opted out, because I want to see him succeed.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for Jaylen Smith, because not being able to really guarantee playing time is a thing that makes sense for a young player like him to move on from. Really crazy how his year kind of ended up playing so well early on and then just kind of falling out of the rotation. It was a bit of a surprise, but I do not blame Jaylen one bit for wanting to move on. And now Indiana does have a hole there at the third string center spot. So that to me could be a veteran minimum pickup. That could be a, hey, let's promote Oscar Shebe to the 15-man roster. I
People were
think
very
that,
mixed on that.
what'd you say?
People were very mixed on that. You and I discussed that idea. I tossed it out there on Twitter. I think half the people that responded to me were all for it. The other half were like, I wanted, kind of dreaming bigger. Like Oscar's offensive game's not there, blah, blah, blah. I get that. He's an elite rebounder who's on a cheap contract when the Pacers need cheap contracts. And I think that would open up one of the two-way spots. So I think it's a really realistic option. I really do.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what they think about Oscar. I'm torn on it myself, because I want to believe that he's good enough to be a third string center, but I also just don't know if I trust him,
Yeah.
especially with Isaiah Jackson kind of having some weird injuries, I feel like, throughout his career that have kind of kept him out of games. And Miles has done a pretty good job of keeping his body healthy the last couple of years, but you just never know what's going to happen. Miles is in a contract year once again, so I know you're going to get some great play from Miles as he's trying to earn another big payday. But I just think that it's extra incentive to take their game up to another level. I don't think it's that guys don't play their best when they're not on a contract year. Just want to clarify that. But I do think it's interesting for sure, Facci. So Jaylen Smith, we'll see where he goes. I'm sure there will be a handful of suitors for him. Probably not day one free agency, but maybe day two, day three, day four, a little bit later once things kind of get ironed out here with so much up in the air. But let's talk about what Michael Scotto reported, because there was an interesting nugget in his report that said the Pacers are receiving calls on Bennedict Mathurin and Jarace Walker after the Obi Toppin re-signing. So what were your thoughts on that?
First thought is, how come Nembhard's name isn't in there? That's exactly what I thought. I liked the, hey, great. It's nice that we're shutting it down, because I felt like it would have been too early to move on from any of those players. But I kind of expected Nembhard's name in there, unless the Pacers are trying to work something out behind the scenes. But sticking on Mathurin and Jarace Walker, I was happy that that's not on the table right now, because I think it probably would have been the Pacers doing too much if they were to trade Bennedict Mathurin and combine him with someone else. It probably would have had to have been, an Aaron Nesmith, or I don't know, maybe I guess you could put him with like an Isaiah Jackson or someone of that sort. And I just don't know what that gets you. So right now, I'm happy the Pacers are holding on to their young guys. They believe in it. But to not see Nembhard's name there was curious to me.
Yeah, I think Mathurin and Walker are like the Pacers team just made this run to the Eastern Conference Finals without those two guys, Mathurin and Walker. And so I think that's probably why people are like, maybe they feel pretty good about the team they have assembled. So that to me could make a little bit of sense for, sorry, I'm laughing. Valanciunas is going to the Washington Wizards as we're talking. That is an interesting pickup there for the Wizards. Anyway, but Mathurin and Walker, let's get back to that. Mathurin and Walker, to me, they're such fascinating players. I think that there's a lot of question marks of with will Mathurin fit what this team wants to do moving forward? Can they afford to pay him? And I think the same thing for Jarace Walker now that Toppin's resigned. Like, where do they envision Jarace Walker? We've already talked about that a little bit, but with Mathurin, we really haven't touched on, do we see him as a full-time starter? Do we see him as a full-time backup? How much money is he going to get coming up here? Because he's going to be due for a new contract here in just 2 years. But you mentioned it, Andrew Nembhard. This guy is eligible for an extension here in July. And I kind of hinted at it. I'm a little bit nervous about it. We'll see what happens, but I'm just going to throw this out here right now. We just got breaking news that Chris Paul has signed a 1-year, $11 million contract with the Spurs. That is a stopgap point guard to kind of help facilitate things around. If there's one team that I think will throw the bag at Andrew Nembhard in restricted free agency, that is the San Antonio Spurs. He definitely feels like a Popovich type of player. He is never going to be the lead point guard of the Indiana Pacers with Tyrese Haliburton here. And I feel like his defensive abilities with what he showed offensively he can do would be a seamless fit with Victor Wembanyama moving forward. I'm going to go ahead and put this out here. And if it happens in a year from now, you can say, I remember when Alex said that back on June 30th or July 1st, whenever you're listening to this. I think that the Spurs are gunning for Andrew Nembhard to be their starting point guard next season, not this coming season in 24-25, but the 25-26 season. And I think Indiana is going to have to really make sure that they figure things out, because if Nembhard does not sign an extension this summer, that makes me incredibly nervous. Now, the Pacers could match it because he will be a restricted free agent, but that's really going to put them in a financial bind. The Pacers could either, one, facilitate a sign and trade with San Antonio if they feel like Nembhard is just too much and they want to work with them, because they did that previously with the Doug McDermott contract and they got something out of it. So very good relationship there between two small market teams in San Antonio and Indiana. But if the Pacers do not lock up Andrew Nembhard long term, my biggest fear, he becomes a San Antonio Spur.
I can't remember if you told me this. We were discussing this off air or on air, but I remember when you told me, I started shaking in my boots, because I really do think that is a really good fit for him, being able to play next to Wemby, playing under Pop. Like, he could be the lead point guard. There's a lot that makes sense over there. And when I did see that Chris Paul thing, first I went, okay. And then I went, wow, yeah, it is just a 1-year deal. And I would have felt a lot better if that was a 2-year deal, anything of the sort. But yeah, that definitely does have me a little bit shook. And I think that there's that part of me that can't blame Nembhard for not signing an early extension. Maybe it could happen. But I know that situation where if you're at a job and you know you're not going to get a promotion, there's someone above you that's not going anywhere, and there's not going to be another spot. And you could say, hey, I could stay here and collect X amount of dollars, whatever. Or you could go elsewhere and take that new title, that new role, anything of that sort. And I know sometimes that is very, very, very appealing. There could be a scenario where the Spurs could offer a front-loaded contract, for Andrew Nembhard that pays big money, where Indiana has already 2 max contracts on the books, makes it a little bit more difficult, and anything could happen over there. So, yeah, I think that if he does not sign an early extension this year, it's going to be a big question moving forward of, do you get ahead of it? Do you try and do a trade? And right now, you're going to have those same questions with Miles Turner. You can't negotiate with Turner early. He's going to be hitting free agency. This is exactly where those questions start, with who's going to be here and who isn't. And I think the Pacers have a lot of questions, not enough answers right now. And I think this is going to be something that is going to carry all throughout this year if he doesn't sign that extension and into next offseason.
Yeah, I would say this. I would not be surprised if the Indiana Pacers do look to move Andrew Nembhard this season if he does not sign that extension in the summer, because I feel like the writing might be on the wall a little bit and they might want to get ahead of it before he hits the open market. And now they're stuck. Either they're going to have to match it, do a sign and trade, or they could work out a deal now that makes sense. I don't think the Pacers want to get rid of Andrew Nembhard. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that Andrew Nembhard, we talked about this, betting on himself, right? That was probably like a week or two ago. We talked about, would it make sense for Nembhard to sign an extension now or wait and push, those chips in a little bit later and say, you know what, let me bet on myself, see what I can do this year, stay healthy, improve myself. But As long as Tyrese Haliburton's a point guard of this team, Andrew Nembhard's never going to be that guy. And we saw what Andrew Nembhard could be as that guy when he was playing against the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, the guy put up some big numbers, and that's only year two Andrew Nembhard. So he's just scratching the surface. Whether he's a Pacer or a Spur or wherever he's at moving forward, if he's not here, I'm going to be a fan of him. I love his game. I think he's a super awesome player. Gives me like a lot of George Hill vibes in terms of like what Pop liked about George Hill. I can see what he would like in Andrew Nembhard as well. So just throwing that out there. Don't want to get people scared or anything like that, but you can't pay everybody, and that's where
No.
everything's going to get really tricky. You talked about tradable contracts earlier with Obi Toppin, like becoming a variable tradable contract. That to me was why it was so fascinating a couple years ago when the Pacers extended Malcolm Brogdon. You didn't like that extension. My whole thing was it's a good trade chip moving forward. It gets it more value. Same thing with Buddy Hield. I know people were very upset that the Pacers kind of let Buddy go for nothing, ended up bringing back McDermott. Obviously, Ben Shepherd develops, but if they had signed Buddy Hield to an extension that he probably was never going to get elsewhere, at least they have that contract to move if they wanted to go out there and get a guy like
KCP
Paul George in a trade, right? So
or
that's the only
KCP on
downfall
a
of
sign
not
and
getting that.
trade, anything of that sort would have worked out. So I definitely hear you on that. There is that is the business side of things. That it's like you might give a guy X amount of dollars, but it doesn't mean he's going to be here for X amount of years. He could
Yep.
very well be traded. And I think for right now, you look at the Andrew Nembhard contract. You can't move that contract alone. It's under $3 million.
Yep.
You just would not be able to bring in the appropriate value. You attach that to a potential Obi Toppin. Now all of a sudden you're getting closer to that $17 million mark in that neighborhood. So I think that is a complete game changer. But I think for Andrew Nembhard right now, if there was a scenario where he ends up being moved, I want to have full trust in the front office that they know he was not signing an extension at any point. That's when I feel that I would have full trust to say, hey, you know what? I don't think they're rolling the dice. I think they did everything they could to get an extension done. And there's a very good chance that he ain't signing an early extension, but I would love to be wrong.
It could be very similar to what happened with Buddy Hield last year, right? Like they wanted to bring him back. He didn't want that money. He wanted to test the open market. They said, okay. Difference is with Nembhard, he's a restricted free agent. So
Yes.
they do have a little bit more team control if they want to do that. So we'll see what happens, but I definitely think that for Andrew Nembhard, him getting such an awesome platform to kind of display his talents in year two in the Eastern Conference Finals, that only is going to pique his interest from other teams across the league. Now we've got one final thing to talk about here, Facci, and that's the moves that have gone around the league as of late. So let's quickly touch on these. It's about 8:50 right now as we're recording this on Sunday night. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to Orlando. What are your thoughts on that deal?
I really like it. I really do. Orlando's coming. They got a good team. I feel like Caldwell Pope is one of those missing pieces. No, he's not Paul George, but he's the very cost effective type of version where you're getting him for about $22 million per year, 3-year deal. Really good 3-and-D. Read that he held opponents to 40% field goal percentage. That was the best mark in the NBA. Orlando's a team that was already good defensively last year. Now it's like a rich get richer type of thing. They have a lot of young talent that's developing. I think it's a great signing for the Orlando Magic.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I think Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is someone I was interested in here for the Pacers. Just thought the money would be too high and couldn't get him at the mid-level exception. But very similar contract numbers to what Bruce Brown got last year for the Pacers. Very tradable contract, like we mentioned, but also a guy that's 32 years old. You wonder what he's got left in the tank. I think there's a reason why Denver wasn't hard pressed on bringing him back and spending a lot of money. Do think that he was a good fit, but you kind of saw his limitations against the Timberwolves and what he was able to do. So good fit for Orlando. It moves the needle a little bit, but not that much to me in terms of them, growing. I don't think he's a key piece because he's a 3-and-D type player that they really needed, and they didn't have that shooter last year. But still with Orlando, they're still a young growing team. Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, they're all taking step forwards. I really like Cole Anthony's game off the bench. Wendell Carter Jr. is another guy that's young, developing, still, a hit or miss kind of long-term answer there. They play Jonathan Isaac at the starting center to start the series off against Cleveland as well. So we'll kind of see how they go about continuing to shape out that roster, but definitely an
It's
added
fun though.
piece. Yeah, he's a good fit there. It doesn't move the needle as much for me as maybe some other players would, like a Paul George, who was potentially rumored there earlier, just because KCP is limited in what he can do, right? So, good player though, very
I
good player.
do I do think they had to make a decision though. I think that the Orlando knew they were in the running for Paul George, but probably not going to get him. And I think that you started to look around the league and they were probably like, look, we have a lot of cap space right now. Like, do we want to wait and potentially strike out, or do we want to get KCP, still have about $27 million left to spend and spend that elsewhere? I think it's a good move. I think it's going to make the teammates in Orlando better. You're talking about Caldwell Pope being a two-time NBA champion with two different teams. So I think that that's going to help. But yeah, does this make them a conference finals team? No. Could they maybe win a first round? Possible. It's possible. And I think it's a good step in their process.
All right, let's move on here to Philadelphia. We already kind of touched on them, but just quickly, your thoughts on what they've done with Paul George probably going there, potentially not official yet, but all signs seem to be pointing to Paul George signing with Philadelphia, who's got already Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, Eric Gordon, Andre Drummond. Your thoughts on the Philadelphia 76ers?
Philly's going to be scary. They're going to be scary. They're going to have an absolute big three with Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George. I think that's a really good three. I think that could be three all-stars. Andre Drummond, I still think is one of the better backup bigs in the league. Eric Gordon, just a good piece off the bench. Who knows what else they end up doing? But I think that Philly is absolutely going to have a bounce back season where they should very well be a top 3 seed instead of being in the play-in, mostly due to Joel Embiid being hurt last year.
Well, that's $1 million question, Facci. The guy gets hurt every single year.
Every
And
year.
I want to believe in the Philadelphia 76ers. And if Embiid can stay healthy, then yes, you are right. This is a team that's going to be a force to be reckoned with here in the Eastern Conference. I think that this is a very good move by them with the cap space that they have. Probably the best free agent out there on the market to go out and get, even though Paul George is 35 years old. I do kind of wonder if this is a small window for them. I wonder if it's a little bit
It is.
nearsighted instead of farsighted. To me, it's like, okay, you probably get maybe 2 good years out of Paul George if you sign him to a 3 year deal. If you give him 4 years, I can't see Paul George really being that impactful at 39 like he is now. So it's to me, it's one of those things where I like Paul George a lot as a player, but I don't think there is a ton left for his future. Maybe the next couple of years, like I said, could be very good. Eric Gordon clearly on his way out of the league. Good player, not great. Andre Drummond, same thing, good backup big, but here you're not counting a lot on him, but he's probably going to have to play a lot of more minutes with Embiid being on the roster because Embiid always gets hurt at some point. So it's just one of those things. We haven't really seen Embiid prove that he's a guy that can get out of the second round of the playoffs. So I want to believe in Philadelphia, but we've even seen with Paul George in the Clippers time, not able to get out of, not being able to make it to the conference finals and things like that. So I like this team a lot, but I don't necessarily think that they are a championship level team with this signing.
They're a fantastic on paper team. You look at this team and you go, whoa, Philly's scary. They could win it all. We'll see how these pieces come together and all that. But I'm with you on that point. They have a 2-year window. It's 2 years. The Clippers would not offer Paul George more than a 3-year deal. I think they know where he's at. This is a guy who, while he's still good, he's averaging about 22 points per game, still good defensively, but he's not the potential MVP candidate before. But I think that Philly had to give him the money. I think that for Paul George, he was going to get a max contract somewhere. It was going to happen, whether it was Philly or it was going to be Orlando or somewhere else. But I think this is a move that Philly had to make. They look really serious. And this is what I mentioned a week or two before, where you hope that the Pacers could get a little bit better because the teams around them are getting better. We saw the Knicks get better. We see Philly get better. I'm sure there'll be some other moves. Pacers right now are running it back. I do hope they can add at least one player eventually that can make a difference. But let's get through some of these other signings.
Yeah, I mean, Orlando definitely got better too with KCP. Like, they didn't take a step back. They took a step forward by making that signing. Even though I don't think it moves the needle that much, they still got better on paper. But yeah, Paul George, interesting player. We'll see what happens with the 76ers moving forward. But, for next year, I'm not trying to sit here and belittle this signing. I think it's a great signing for them based on what they had cap space wise and who's out there on the open market. But yeah, we'll have to see. I'm not saying that they're not going to be better than the Pacers, but let's see what happens. Moving forward, the New York Knicks. There's a team that just basically stole the headlines when they traded for Mikal Bridges for like 8 first-round picks. Pretty wild trade for a role player, in my opinion. And they
Yeah.
also bring back OG Anunoby. There is some serious concern they might lose Isaiah Hartenstein to. I know he's meeting with OKC tonight. So, what are your thoughts on the Knicks bringing back OG to that deal that they gave him, plus trading what they traded to get Mikal Bridges?
On paper for OG, it is a lot of money. He is paid like one of the best players in the NBA, and he's definitely not one of the best. But the matter of fact is that the Knicks were extremely good with OG. I mean, in the regular season, they were 20-3
They won
overall.
85% of their games when OG played.
That says a lot. That he fits the style of what Tibbs wants to run. And I think that when you made that trade for him and you gave up young players like RJ Barrett, Emmanuel quickly, some other stuff like that, you had to get the deal done. So to get the deal done there, I think that was the right move. Then when you make the trade for Bridges, that says to me the Knicks are all in. They don't care about picks. They still actually have a couple of picks, but they traded a lot of future picks. And to me, they have now two of the best two-way wings in the NBA. And I think that that's something that every team covets, a Mikal Bridges or an OG, and the Knicks have both of them. That is mind-blowing right now. And they also have, when you look at Bridges, I believe that Bridges, A, hasn't missed an NBA game since he's entered the league. B is also top of the list every single year in terms of minutes played. Well, that fits what Tibbs wants to do as well. So he's got a lineup now. He can play for about 40 minutes a night. A lot of them played together in college. The chemistry should be great. I think that the Knicks made some noise. Hartenstein, though, I do think he's going to OKC. This is a second round pick that we're talking about. Second round pick that's been on 6 teams. This is his opportunity to cash in. He can get $23 million per year from OKC. The Knicks could only give him about $16 million per year. It's a pretty big difference long term. I think if they lose Hartenstein, that is a solid loss for the Knicks. They'll still be a very good team, though. If they bring back Hartenstein, the Knicks are scary.
Yeah, I mean, here's how I feel about Hartenstein. I think he is a big difference maker for this team, but I think out of all the pieces they brought in, he's the one that is affordable to lose, right?
I absolutely agree with that.
There's been some talks they might have to lose Deuce McBride to make
That would be a
this
mistake.
deal work. I think that'd be a massive mistake. I think they will try to find other ways to get rid of salary, whether that's, giving up some picks if they have any left with an Alec Burks to a team with cap space to try and create space for the deal to happen. So would not be a surprise there. But I will just say this about OG Anunoby, Facci. I'm going through his game log since he entered the league in 2017. Facci, he has not played a full season of games because he is always hurt. He played 50 games last year, 67 the season before, 48 the year before that, 43 the year before that. Love OG Anunoby. We talked about OG as the number one guy on our trade targets list. Dude can't stay healthy. So we saw what happened in the playoffs. It was a freak thing that happened with his hamstring. If he's overplaying too many minutes, I wonder if that's going to put too much wear and tear on his body in the Thibodeau style of play, where Mikal Bridges might be able to benefit from that. I wonder how much OG will be able to handle that. We've just seen this Knicks team. This year obviously was an anomaly because a lot of them got hurt, but that happens a lot of times with Tom Thibodeau teams. Those teams just they get overworked, they play too many minutes, and they get hurt. I think that the Mikal Bridges addition is a massive addition for them. I think that it was a massive overpay for what they got
It was.
for Mikal Bridges because I like Mikal Bridges, but I was telling you that's a third option on a championship team at best.
That's the crazy thing. It's true though. Like my brother barely knows basketball. He's a Knicks fan. He like got basically I think the playoffs really got him like back into being a Knicks fan. And he's like, "Tell me about Bridges. Like, is this guy really worth all those picks?" And I'm like, "I don't think so because when you trade those picks, you typically trade it for like a Kevin Durant or like a Paul George, like an MVP type candidate." Like I told my brother, I was like, openly, I was like, "This is a guy that is an elite third option." And my brother's like, "Elite third option? That sounds like way too much." I'm like, "It probably is too much." But the Knicks are looking at these draft picks right now, like what have we done over the last 30 years when they were drafting guys, early in the draft that never panned out? So I think the Knicks right now, they push the chips in. They are now championship or bust over the next few years. I do think the one thing that works for them is it's a young group that
Yeah.
is together, not like like I mentioned, like a Kevin Durant or a Paul George that are like, hey, it's now or never.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, they've got plenty of time to grow, and of course, the Nova Knicks 4 guys there from the college team that won it all. I mean, hey, if Tom Thibodeau keeps running these guys into the ground, might as well just have Jay Wright on speed dial because he might be
Yep.
coming in to coach his team, right? But at some point, though, I mean, they're going to have to make a decision on some of these players because Bridges is going to be up for an extension as well. I feels like Randall is probably the odd man out in this group,
Everybody
probably
thinks
gets traded. And I could see them going a little bit small ball with OG at the 4, Mikal at the 3, and then Josh Hart or DiVincenzo at the 2, somebody else coming off the bench, and then finding a center, whether it's Mitchell Robinson or they go out there and get somebody else in free agency. They're going to be a really good team, though. And I think Jalen Brunson kind of proved and ascended into one of those special players, Facci. So the Knicks definitely got significantly better by getting Mikal Bridges. And Indiana, it's interesting to see, right? Because Indiana didn't have Jarace Walker or Ben Mathurin in the playoffs, so maybe that could be their additions. That they didn't really go out there in free agency and get anybody, but maybe some internal growth could be the difference maker for this Pacers team. Don't want to write them off yet. But last thing here as we wrap it up, Facci, have to get your thoughts on what took place Friday night in Madison Square Garden. Logan Paul and Tyrese Haliburton come out to an array of boos in New York City. And Tyrese Haliburton and Logan Paul were laying some smack talk down on New York City. Jalen Brunson jumping over the barricade, trying to distract Tyrese Haliburton from giving Logan Paul some brass knuckles. And then they faced off in the ring together, had a staring contest. Jalen Brunson brought a steel chair into the arena, into the ring. I mean, I was loving this. I know you used to work for WWE, so what was it like to see Tyrese and Jalen Brunson going at it on WWE?
I thought this was one of the coolest things I had seen in a long time. I'm going to be honest. Like, I'm still a huge wrestling fan. It was my life growing up. Seeing that, I was like, this is so well done that you got Halliburton coming out in the garden to all these boos and everybody, and then to get Jalen Brunson involved. It's like when Brunson came out there, you hear the MVP chants for Brunson, and to see them face off like that, that was just so well done between, having a heel, a bad guy in wrestling, and a baby face, the good guy, that's the term. They had that perfectly. And now it just feels like it ignited this rivalry just a little bit more. It makes, in my opinion now, this almost feels like, it sounds crazy, but it feels like a passing of the torch of like Reggie Miller to Tyrese Haliburton to say, like, you are now the undisputed Knicks villain moving forward. And to me, that was really cool. And you got to remember this. This is one of the first things that I thought of. When we had Tyrese Haliburton on Setting the Pace, he said that he had an opportunity to get involved with WWE when he was back with the Kings, and the Kings shut it down. They wouldn't let him participate. And I feel like the Pacers have said, you be you. Be safe, but be you. Have fun. And look at the fun that he's having. It's like, this is taking his like stardom, I think, to the next level. He's having a blast. And just from knowing from that interview that we did with Tyrese Haliburton, where he was wearing a wrestling shirt, I guarantee
Triple
you that
H.
made his life. It was probably a childhood dream to be like, I got in the ring and was involved in a storyline for a night. And I feel like for that, that was just so cool. I'm gonna be honest, I wore a wrestling shirt to the mall the next day. And someone went, you go to the garden last night? And I was like, I didn't, but man, I regret it. And we started talking about this. This is just some guy, some worker in Old Navy. Him and I are talking about this. That's what that moment did. It got people talking.
Nice. You shop at Old Navy?
Got some stuff. Got some stuff.
Nice. Yeah,
You know,
I just went there 2 Saturdays ago. Look at us, Foch.
got good deals. I like to save a couple bucks here and there. So
Cheap
they,
wad.
they had a good deal.
Tightwad Foch over here. But no, I mean, I agree with you. Like, it's really cool to see. Like, Jalen Brunson did not realize he was that big of a wrestling fan. Both Tyrese and Jalen Brunson got exclusive shirts put on the WWE shop as well. So you can go
Cool.
get the, what was it, Indy 317? Was that what the one was for Haliburton?
Tyrese 317. It's like,
Tyrese 317.
Austin 316. Yep.
Yeah. So everybody knows Austin 316. That's pretty epic from late 90s, early 2000s era of WWE. Jalen Brunson's was more of like a caricature of him with some really cool font for his name on there. So that was a pretty cool shirt too. Love seeing them face off. I did tweet out that I would love to see a faction of Indiana Pacers versus the Knicks. I wouldn't necessarily want it being them wrestling, but like have to ask you, did you agree with the 3 that I picked? I picked Tyrese, obviously, to be the mouthpiece because he said that several times. I'll be the mouthpiece. James Johnson and Isaiah Jackson. That feels like to me the best two options to throw out there to put up against the Knicks. And I said DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, and Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about like real stuff, like yes, I definitely want James Johnson having Tyrese's back instead of Miles Turner. No offense, Miles. I think if you're going for like most marketable, then yeah, you're going like Tyrese, Miles, and Siakam. I feel like if
I
there was
don't see
like
them as guys for WWE though.
they're no, they're
I'm
not.
talking
There's no
WWE guys,
yeah,
Foch. Talk to me.
like I think that like James Johnson could definitely, given his background in mixed martial arts, could definitely pull something off.
Oh yeah.
So I feel like Isaiah Jackson, I'm sure he could. He's athletic enough. So I feel like those would probably be the best options, behind. Like you could see Tyrese being a bad guy, kind of getting what they call some cheap heat, doing something a little bit dirty, runs around. James Johnson gives like a clothesline, like something like you could see that, having having him, the guys behind him. So I definitely think that that would probably be a group that makes the most sense.
And people were asking, how is Tyrese a heel? I said, guys, he's in New York freaking city. What do you expect him to be? A baby
Exactly.
face?
Yes.
What are we
Like that's
doing?
how it goes. If this is in Indiana, it's a different story.
Yeah.
It's Tyrese in Madison Square Garden that immediately makes him the most hated guy. And then you pair him with Logan Paul. That's how you get heat. That's how you get people being like, man, I hate that guy. Because it's just like Logan Paul already gets enough of that stuff. So I just feel like WWE did it perfectly.
Last thing here, what would you give Haliburton and Brunson acting wise letter grade?
I think Haliburton was better. I think he did a great job. Small things. When he put on the brass knucks, he hit him against the stairs so all the fans could hear it. So you can. So if you're all the way up to the 400s, you're like, what does he even have on his hands? You could hear it. So I think he did a really good job with that, and I think Tyrese did enough for fans to just be like, man, I just don't like that guy. And I think that's what he wanted to get across. It's about being a bad guy in that situation. I think Brunson was like, I think you could just tell Haliburton was a bigger wrestling fan that like knew how to act in the moment. And I think for Brunson, it was a little bit more new.
Okay,
He
I
did a
like
good
that.
job. He did.
I like what was the letter grade you'd give Tyrese?
Tyrese, I'd give him like an A. Yeah, I think he
Hey,
did.
okay.
I don't think there's anything he could have done. Like, I feel like the Pacers didn't want him like taking any bumps, going down, anything like
No,
that.
no, no, no.
I saw
Acting.
Brunson when he got in, someone like circled his hand. They're like, oh, I think he hurt his hand. Like, I was like, oh my God. So I guess if I'm giving Halliburton A, I guess I'd give Brunson like a B or a B plus.
Man, you're being really you're fair with these grades. I was thinking more like a C minus for Brunson and a B for Halliburton.
Yeah,
Definitely room for improvement. Come on.
I think him knocking the knucks,
So
the
let's
brass
talk
knucks.
about that because I actually thought I understand why you say that. I'm glad you bring that point up so everybody knows, like up in the 400 level, they can tell. Okay, he's doing something. Oh, it's a brass knuckles. Well,
Yeah.
why would you do that if you're trying to sneak those to somebody? Doesn't that kind of give it away?
I know, but you want to get that reaction from the crowd. So it's like, yes, are there ways that some wrestlers could be sneaky, but like you want to make sure it's loud enough the crowd knows what's going on, the camera's seeing it. You don't want to be too sneaky because then someone would be like, what did he even do? I didn't even see that. Like they did it perfectly on that. So I
Okay.
thought that was some good like wrestling IQ there. So that was nice. And I think for Brunson, like, he hopped over the barricade nicely. Like, good thing he didn't trip or anything like that. That would have been
The
that
steel
would have
chair
really been
throwing was good.
yeah, yeah. Like having the chair, I think that was great, and I think like he was able to have it like kind of settle in a little bit where those MVP chants came. He wasn't moving too quickly. Like he like was able to soak it in. So I think they both did well. I just think Halliburton did better.
Yeah, and I like Halliburton's little throw of the hand when he looked at Brunson like, forget you, dude. Like just
Yep, yep.
threw him off, like whatever, just said, I'm done with you, whatever, you're not in this, I beat you here in game 7. I loved his little backstage thing with Logan Paul when he was like, hey, I'm just glad New York finally won something.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
that's
then
good.
what Logan Paul was like, yeah, y'all suck. This
Yeah,
is so
yeah.
funny.
No, I think it was a job well done, and I just think that right now you could just see like Halliburton's been building that relationship with WWE, and you never know where it could go. You never know. So
Yeah.
I think it's good exposure at the end of the day. That it's just like that clip made ESPN and a ton of other outlets, and it's just like And for anyone who thought you couldn't be a star in Indiana, Tyrese Haliburton is absolutely shattering that myth, that lie.
Yeah, SummerSlam, WrestleMania, and the Royal Rumble will be taking place at Lucas Oil Stadium here in Indianapolis. They just signed that contract agreement back on Monday or Tuesday last week. So pretty exciting stuff. I know Pat McAfee's imprint on the WWE has made a huge factor in that. And of course, Tyrese was just on with Pat McAfee on his show a couple of days ago when Windhorse came on there and just said, the Pacers were trying to give Tyrese a little bit of help. We'll see what happens. Obviously, Wendy just being
What
a little
happened to
bit of
that?
being a little sleuther there and just having a little fun. But they're on the prowl. Pacers on the prowl is what I think was the headline there. But I will say this: I love that the relationship is developing. I think there's a place for Tyrese to have a voice in WWE, whether it's in a small role or not, kind of similar to what he's doing in a Logan Paul storyline. Maybe not the biggest storyline of all. It's not like he's joining the bloodline or anything like that. But
Yeah,
some really good stuff here. And end of the day, Paul Heyman's still the GOAT. What a great
that was
acting
good.
job by Paul Heyman. Like that's A+ level acting, WWE level acting. Tyrese is not there yet. So
Exactly. Yeah. Don't make me take this A back. It was a far cry from what Paul Heyman did, but at the same point for Tyrese, hey,
for a non WWE superstar, it's an A.
yes, exactly. And sometimes some celebrities come in there and it's cringy, and that was not the case. So I thought that was something that was like the last thing I was expecting. I was one of those
Yes.
guys that kind of like fangirled and sent that clip to like so many people because I knew they weren't watching wrestling, but like I had to be like, yeah, like I'm still here, and they're like, you're still watching that? I was like, absolutely. So yeah, had to do that. But overall, it was just fun, and hey, free agency, we're only a couple hours in. I know sometimes it can be a little bit slow, but we ain't done yet. So let's just hold back here, temper expectations a little bit, and still feel good about the roster that we have, because no matter what, when ESPN says, and I did hear this today, it said it was like something like the only team that the so and so needs to worry about is the Boston Celtics in the East. And it's like, well, you forget we just made the Eastern Conference Finals, so everybody's going to sleep on us. That's what they do. But Indiana has a good roster, and I think that that's something to be proud of right now.
All right, everybody. If you want to follow us on social media, go to google.com and type in Setting the Pace of Pacers podcast. You will find all of our stuff there. That's right. Google us, ladies and gentlemen. We are on there. And if you haven't already, leave us a 5-star rating and review on the podcast platforms on the audio side of things. And if you're listening and watching this on the YouTube channel, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/setting the pace, a Pacers podcast. But Facci, if you're glad the Pacers have brought back Pascal Siakam and Obi Toppin in this free agency period, then hit me with those 3 words.
Let's go Pacers.